right, next question.
Hi, my name is Matt Dighton. I was the volunteer coordinator from Greensburg. My statement's to Bob. Bob, I was out of town. Congratulations on the election.
It happens real well when nobody else wants a job and nobody files.
No, Bob has been a big asset to all of us in Greensburg. I want to talk about self-help housing real quick. Just a question to the other communities, but I want to go back to the mental health thing. In Greensburg, associated with our tornado, we have had 3 suicides. And our population was about 1,500. We're about half of that. So if you do the math on 3 suicides to maybe figure 1,000 population, or do you go back pre-tornado? So it's all around you. So you got to take care of your neighbor. And just like Bob said, that tornado look in the eye, it's very common still today, as it is anywhere. Self-help housing. We were lucky enough that Greensburg needed to convert renters into first-time home buyers, homeowners. So we put together a self-help housing program and built, we had budget for 50. We ended up building, I think, 32 of those homes. And we would build 10 at a time. And the residents couldn't move in until everybody else was done, and those they built them in series of 10, 10, and 10. Are any other communities working to get renters to become first-time homeowners in your community with that type of self-help housing program?
Miranda?
We had an interesting thing happen. We still have a lot of blighted homes throughout our community, but we were able to. There was a group that came in and created a community land trust. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with what that is, but they were able to purchase lots and sometimes abandoned homes where they could raise the home and build a new property on that land. The community land trust would retain ownership of the home and then sell the home to the person, which met a need for low income or lower income housing that we had lost. I think a good majority of our valley is middle income. Middle income is a good word for it. There was a lot of renters. There was also a couple of manufactured home parks that were impacted. So we saw a need for additional housing for people who are that moderate to low income, and that community land trust was a way to facilitate that. Other than that, we've not had anything really come to fruition that would help with home purchase, but that made it affordable for people who maybe couldn't afford to buy a home prior to that. One caveat to that is during our flood in 2011, we also were going through a large oil boom. So we had a huge influx of people coming in at the same time. So to have 4,000 to 5,000 homes go off the market when you've got 10,000 people moving into town at the same time was really a problem for us. So the land trust did open up the opportunities to get homes back into the valley, to get the valley somewhat rehabilitated and leave it available to affordable housing.
Great. Troy?
We have implemented some of our self-help projects with our nonprofits. We had a close relationship with Habitat for Humanity prior to the disaster. In fact, funded them with our entitlement city street program. We received approximately $158 million from the Department of Housing and Urban Development for infrastructure, housing, economic development. So we fund some of our self-help agencies with that funding. One of the challenges we did have in some of our neighborhoods, they were lower income. They got hit hard. Some of the homes were worth $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. They weren't incentivized to be worth that much just because age and condition. And even some neighborhoods were upwards of almost 75% rental. So that housing stock doesn't come back. So we really relied on our housing programs to help fund them. And we also need to encourage home ownership in those neighborhoods in case something like this happened again. Those neighborhoods could come back. We developed a program where we offer $30,000 in closing costs and down payment assistance. And we have now, as of last week, I believe, helped that 500 person or family purchase a home in the recovery area. So those are some of the programs we're doing.
We have also in Cedar Rapids a number of housing programs that helped people come back. The neighborhoods that were hit with, for us, had a similar, lower than median housing price loss, and you don't replace them. You're exactly right. It was very tough to look at those numbers and try to figure out what you were going to do. So we had a number of programs. One for rental properties. We did do a rental housing program for rehabilitation, knowing that those rental properties did need to come back, both for the owners of the rental properties and the people that needed to rent them in neighborhoods. And we also, we did a very, very successful program that we're just on the very end of right now. It's called Roots, if you want to Google that, in Cedar Rapids, a program with state and federal funding that allowed new housing to be built on lots as soon as they were available, our acquisition lots in the neighborhoods that we wanted to rebuild, where we went hand in hand with developers who had buyers in hand and were able to build new stick-built houses that were valued at probably $130,000 to $150,000 houses with buy-downs where their mortgages were about $90,000. So people could, for the first time, buy houses. They had to stay in them for 5 years, and we're seeing the first of those houses actually turning, and you see them being sold immediately, and people are moving into more expensive housing. It's working exactly how we had hoped, and neighborhoods being rebuilt at the same time. The other very successful program for us for housing was a local, a faith-based organization that used $1 million of a local entrepreneur, a company owner in town, donated funds to do a program called Block by Block, where they acquired houses, rehabbed, built new, and literally block by block created neighborhoods that included neighborhood supports, where part of your kind of like Habitat, where part of your purchase of that house was becoming part of kind of a neighborhood association, so that you built the social capital along with the house, and you actually built a neighborhood, and that was a really successful program that could be emulated, and was very successful.
Okay, great. Yeah, Walt?
I do want to give a different perspective, because right now from Tuscaloosa, all I've given you is rainbows and unicorns. But there's a reality, and I'd like to approach this of what you're going to face, not necessarily what has happened in Tuscaloosa. Is if you have a Moore type event or a Joplin type event in your community, you're going to have some dynamic shape up. Now, those dynamics can differ because you don't know which housing gets hit. Is it rental? What's the income? And all that. What's the availability in the housing market? But inevitably, in the first couple weeks, you're going to begin a turf war between FEMA and HUD of who has responsibility between short-term housing needs and who has responsibility for long-term housing needs. Then you're going to have a situation where the FEMA staff turns over. And I will say the FEMA staff that came to Tuscaloosa those first 2 weeks were critical to us surviving. They were just outstanding. But in that turnover, then the information naturally changes. And then the HUD officials have turnover. So now all of a sudden you're dealing with two different dynamics. And then as you begin looking 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years after the disaster, you're still trying to figure out how in the world can I ever spend these funds for housing. Spending disaster recovery dollars is like, have you ever seen the movie Brewster's Millions? It is almost impossible to do. And so that has to be, if I could go back again, one of those lessons learned is that those dollars that we were expecting to flow through and then us be able to expedite quickly back into the damage zones, it doesn't happen. And then years later, like we are, you will still be dealing with it today. That needs to be part of the recovery calculus. And hopefully, in the years to come, our government on both the state and federal level can become more adept and quicker to the changing environment. Certainly, that's one of the reasons why I decided to participate. But let me give you one small example before I turn the mic back over again. Let's take a Habitat for Humanity house. We've given millions to Habitat to get along the same lines of getting people from rental to home own. You go in and you buy the lot for $20,000. But immediately, if you're using disaster recovery, CDBG-DR money, you've got to do environmental testing. You've got to do the cultural resource archaeology review. By the way, depending upon what they find, you could be going into a phase 2. Oh, let's do the noise pollution study for the airport that's 5 miles away. You see what I'm getting at? Now we've spent a year in testing on different things. We've spent thousands of dollars, in some cases more than we purchased the lot itself, now for the opportunity to build that person a home, who, by the way, has been sitting in short-term housing and may have moved on anyway by the time you get around to building their home. That is the reality. And that is not shared with you at the very beginning. Again, that's something that needs to be put in the calculus. It's a lot of well-meaning people and a lot of great intentions, but the application is tough. And here's the other thing. Larger cities can have the internal infrastructure, the accounting, the auditing, the legal services to deal with it. If you're a smaller city, it is certainly going to be very time-consuming and problematic to deal with all those funds flowing through your communities.
Anyone else?
Well, I just would
Yes.
definitely echo the mayor with regard to these funds, the disaster recovery funds that he was referring to and that Joplin received. When we first heard about those funds, we got $52.9 million allocated to us. I mean, we thought we had died and gone to heaven just about with regard to what we could do with those funds. And I understand that these are federal funds, taxpayer dollars, and they need to be accounted for, so forth. But it overwhelmed the ability of my staff to deal with this for a long time. And we're 3 years out, and we've spent probably 10 million of those funds, maybe, out of $52 million, and not built any houses yet with these funds. And we're obligated to spend a lot of money on housing. And we will spend money on housing through a redevelopment project that we're working on. But just sort of as an aside, these funds are coming down through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, CDBG, which that agency is really not overly, it doesn't seem to me to be an appropriate agency to deal with these type of funds. So that's sort of an aside. I hope there's anybody from HUD here. I apologize, we still want our money.
And I agree. In fact, we've had to hire a consulting firm to help us manage the funds. And you do have to manage expectations. You know, Sandra from HUD, she's our representative. She raised her hand. She realized she used to be on the other side of it. So she realizes the difficulty in spending those funds. It comes with a lot of strings attached, but they don't tell you that when they announce some of the money that's coming your way. People get the impression, in our case, we have $158 million in a bank account somewhere. And that's not the case. It's actually a reimbursement. The city doesn't have $158 million to spend to get reimbursed, so it stays there. There's just a lot of strings attached and so many ways to get yourself in trouble, the process you have to go through to spend those funds. So, I mean, we had to hire a consulting firm with that expertise just to be able to spend those funds.